The explosion didn't come from my shotgun, it came from my driveway. A fireball lit up the sky as chunks of rusted metal rained down across the pasture. One of the HOA board members was on the ground, clutching his leg and screaming. And that right there was the moment they realized they'd parked in the wrong damn driveway. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got here. You ever live so far out that the wind sounds different? Not the city kind that whistles between buildings or rattles the glass in overpriced condos, but the kind that moves across open fields, dances through cornrows, and makes your bones feel older than they are. That's the wind I woke up to every morning, out here on the last real piece of land my family hadn't sold. 67 acres of misfit heaven, wrapped in a rusted barbed wire fence and anchored by the old farmhouse my great-granddaddy built with his bare hands and a stubborn mule. I had 2 dogs, Buck and Lucy, 3 chickens that hated me, a goat named Credence who thought he ran the place, and a driveway so long you could lose cell service halfway up it. It wasn't perfect, but it was quiet, until the subdivision came in. You'd think building a gated community next to a working farm would be a non-starter, but money talks, and the county board had been half asleep when the developers snuck in that zoning reclassification. They named it something pretentious like Silver Creek Hollow, even though the only creek on record ran straight through my property, and the only thing hollow was their sense of respect. At first, it was harmless. Fancy people in shiny cars moving into identical beige boxes with matching yard flags and solar-powered gnomes. They smiled, waved, probably thought I was the groundskeeper. Then came the flyers. Community reminder: outdoor structures must be visually harmonious with adjacent homes. Folded neatly and left in my mailbox, my rural, non-governed mailbox. I laughed the first time. The second time, I started collecting them. By the 6th, I had a drawer full of what they called courtesy notices, complete with passive-aggressive underlines and vague threats about property values. And then she came. Clipboard in hand, lip gloss shining like a car dealership inflatable tube man, and a tight little smirk that could curdle buttermilk. Karen. Of course her name was Karen. She introduced herself as the HOA board president, acting like she'd just been appointed to Congress. Said she wanted to open a dialogue about the state of visual cohesion between the subdivision and neighboring properties of concern. I asked if she'd like some lemonade. She declined. I offered her a rake and pointed to the back pasture. She declined that too, said she'd circle back with some landscaping ideas. What followed was a parade of unsolicited suggestions, mostly about how I might improve my fencing, repaint my barn a more community-friendly color, and consider relocating my antique weather vane because it resembled a weapon from certain angles. I told her if it started firing on its own, she'd be the first to know. The real trouble started on a Tuesday night. I was up late rewiring a busted porch light when I noticed headlights bouncing down my driveway, slow, deliberate, and way too familiar. I watched from the shadows as a white Lexus SUV rolled right up to the fork where my gravel split, one way to the barn, the other to my workshop. Then it parked, just sat there, nobody got out. About 10 minutes later, another car pulled in, then another, a black Range Rover, a blue Audi, all of them idling like they were waiting for valet service. Eventually, they turned off their lights and climbed out, dressed in matching windbreakers with Silver Creek HOA printed across the back like some kind of paramilitary law enforcement unit. They weren't there for me. No knock on the door, no clipboard visit, just walked down my damn property like it was a park, cut through the far pasture gate, and vanished into the tree line. I didn't sleep that night. Next morning, I found tire tracks in my field and half a cigar stub crushed into my gravel like a middle finger. I asked around. No one knew anything. When I brought it up to Karen, she blinked real slow and said they were conducting a routine security sweep of community-adjacent perimeters. I asked when they'd started doing that on private land. She told me my driveway was unmarked and ambiguous in jurisdiction. I told her my dogs would be unambiguous if they saw strangers again. She didn't like that. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated. Always at night. Always the same cars. Sometimes they'd leave trash behind, coffee cups, wine bottles, a plastic name badge once that read M. Hawthorne, Board Secretary. I started putting up signs, private property. No trespassing. Whole members will be towed or fed to the goat. They disappeared overnight. Even the ones I nailed to trees. I caught one guy using my side gate to shortcut through my pasture. When I confronted him, he said he assumed it was community green space. I asked if community green space usually had a goat with a bell and a sign that said, "Eats shoes." He laughed. I didn't. I filed a complaint with the sheriff. He said it was a civil issue. Said unless I had video or someone threatened me directly, it was just a neighborly misunderstanding. Then he asked if I'd thought about putting in a gate. That's when I realized they weren't just being lazy. They were using my land to bypass their own dumb layout. The main entrance to Silver Creek was a single road, looping half a mile out to the highway. My driveway cut that time in half. And somewhere in that subdivision planning meeting, someone figured out it was easier to trespass than fix their design flaw. I installed cameras, bought a drone. The footage was textbook: cars pulling in, people walking out, heading straight for the back fence line like ants to sugar. I posted the videos on Nextdoor. Karen had them flagged for inflammatory content. I emailed them to the HOA's legal contact, got an automated reply. I called the county to ask if anyone had requested an easement across my land. They hadn't, but the clerk helpfully informed me that Karen had filed a complaint about my safety hazards and lack of lighting along the driveway. The gall of these people. They wanted to treat my land like a damn strip mall access road, and they had the nerve to criticize my gravel. The final straw came when I found my dogs locked in the workshop one morning, whining and agitated. The gate was open, the cameras were disabled, someone had been close, real close. I knew then that polite signs, cameras, and conversations weren't going to work. They saw my silence as consent, my land as common ground, my home as a scenic shortcut, but what they didn't know was that I'd been reading, researching, planning, not for revenge, not yet. That part would come later, but for now, I just wanted them to remember what it felt like to be watched. To feel like, maybe, just maybe, one of those gravel mounds along my driveway wasn't just dirt. The signs didn't work. The cameras didn't work. Even catching them on tape didn't work. If anything, my efforts to play nice seemed to egg them on like it was some kind of HOA hazing ritual. That week, they escalated from cutting across my land to actively loitering on it, like my backyard was their clubhouse annex. It started on a Friday evening. I was coming back from town with a fresh bag of feed and 2 replacement light bulbs for the barn, only to find 5 folding chairs arranged in a semicircle by my tractor shed. The chairs weren't mine. Neither was the half-eaten cheese plate sitting on a blanket next to an empty bottle of Chardonnay. I stopped the truck mid-turn and just stared at them. 5 of the HOA board members, Karen included, sat there sipping wine like they were hosting a vineyard tour, not trespassing on private farmland. They were loud, laughing about something Karen said, and for a second I thought maybe they'd booked a tour and gotten lost. But then I saw the sign I'd hand-painted and staked just 2 days prior: private property, no parking, no picnics, ripped in half and stuffed under someone's purse like a dirty napkin. I got out. Didn't say a word at first. Just walked right past them to the shed and started unloading feed, slamming the tailgate harder than necessary. They barely acknowledged me. One of them, Kevin I think, or maybe Todd, one of those golf shirt types, raised his plastic cup and said evening, like we were old friends. Karen turned in her chair and said, "We figured the view here was too nice to waste. Hope you don't mind, we'll clean up after ourselves." I told them I absolutely did mind, and that if they were going to play sommelier on someone else's land, they ought to bring a damn permit. Karen waved it off like I'd offered her a low Yelp rating. "We're just neighbors, sharing space," she said. "There's no need to make this adversarial." Then she pointed toward the far corner of my pasture and said, "Technically, it's all unmarked out there." We assumed it was communal. I didn't say what I wanted to say. Instead, I let Buck out of the truck. Buck is part cattle dog, part low-flying missile. He didn't bite, he's too well trained for that. But he herded those wine-sipping interlopers so fast they dropped their cheese knives and spilled a full bottle of Sauvignon Blanc across Karen's pantsuit. I didn't apologize, and they didn't come back the next day, but they came back Sunday, this time in the form of reflective driveway markers. Bright orange, hammered into the gravel with little HOA stickers at the top. 30 feet into my land. I don't know if they were marking it for future use or trying to claim it like settlers at the Oklahoma land rush, but either way, it felt like a declaration. I pulled them up. Next morning, they were back, this time with laminated paper signs zip-tied to my fence posts. Community overflow parking in effect. Silver Creek Hollow HOA authorization 14F. Authorization? From whom? God. Because last I checked, neither Karen nor the board owned an inch of the gravel they were squatting on. I tore those down too. Next came the trash. Not the accidental kind. No, these were full-size Starbucks cups placed carefully on top of my gatepost. One had the word, "Thanks," written on the side in Sharpie. Another time, someone left behind a rolled yoga mat and a water bottle like they'd used my pasture for their morning stretches. I filed another report with the county, another non-response. Civil matter, they said. Maybe work it out with the HOA leadership. Yeah, because that had gone so well before. Then, about a week after I tossed their last bottle into the garbage, I got a letter taped to my workshop door, bright yellow, city seal on top, and stamped, "Urgent zoning complaint." According to the anonymous report, I was operating an unlicensed RV park, complete with multiple non-compliant dwellings and illegal gray water discharge. I blinked. Then I laughed. Then I didn't. Because, as ridiculous as it was, this all stemmed from my cousin's busted camper he'd left behind after his divorce. It was now part of the public record. Some clipboard-wielding idiot could show up and start measuring things. And if there's one thing the government loves more than property taxes, it's a code violation with an attached fine. I called the number listed. Took me 3 tries to get someone on the line. When I did, the woman was polite but firm. The complaint was filed with accompanying photos, she said. We are obligated to investigate within 10 business days. Accompanying photos. That meant someone had been close enough to snap shots from inside my fence line. I asked if she could tell me who filed the complaint. She couldn't. Anonymous tip, she said. I already knew, and that's when I stopped being neighborly. I pulled out the dusty old filing cabinet in the back of the farmhouse and started digging. My grandfather was a pack rat and a legal nerd, 2 qualities that had made him a nightmare to deal with, but a goldmine in moments like this. In between handwritten chicken feed logs and faded Sears catalogs, I found a brittle manila envelope labeled County Rights, 1,904, 1,947. Inside, I found a document that made me sit up straighter. It was a mineral rights grant filed in 1,904, signed by a judge whose name sounded like a bad bourbon, Clifton Beauregard Longley. It outlined permissible extraction activities on Parcel D, which, after a quick property overlay with a map I printed from the assessor's office, turned out to be my land. The language was archaic, but one section stood out in glorious typewriter ink. Landowner retains full discretion to employ deterrent-based explosive mining equipment to discourage unauthorized encroachment or unlawful trespass. It had been filed back when dynamite was sold over the counter, and half the county was made of coal and gumption, but it hadn't been revoked, and more importantly, it hadn't been superseded. I took that clause and ran with it, figuratively and literally. The next week, I scoured auctions, scrapyards, and surplus stores until I found what I needed: a half-dozen rusted-out water heater tanks, some smoke bombs, a few lengths of pressure-sensitive garden hose, and several heavy-duty unexploded ordnance, "Do not touch," signs I ordered off a military surplus site that didn't ask questions. I painted them olive drab, scorched them with a blowtorch for that recently detonated look, and buried them halfway in the gravel along the curve where HOA cars loved to linger. Each one had a shallow trench dug beneath it with wires running into the earth, not connected to anything, but just visible enough to make someone think twice. I mounted an old WWII-style danger placard on a steel rod at the head of the driveway. Mind area. No vehicles beyond this point. Trespassers may detonate live ordinance. The next morning, Buck and I sat on the porch with our coffee, watching as Karen's Lexus rolled up to the usual parking spot, then braked. Then reversed very, very slowly. That night, the HOA newsletter was updated. They called it a Community Parking Reassessment Initiative. I called it a win. For a while it worked. No cars. No trash. No clipboard visits. They crossed the street instead of using my driveway. The pasture was quiet again. But if you've ever fought with an HOA before, you know peace is just the eye of the hurricane. And the barometric pressure was dropping, fast. For a few blessed weeks things were quiet. No cars idling at the end of my driveway. No HOA safari expeditions cutting through my pasture. Karen had retreated like a raccoon with a flashlight in its face, shaken but not gone. The landmine display had done its job, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd won. But if I'd learned anything about HOA people, it's that they treat losing like a delayed win. They don't quit, they regroup. And 3 weeks later, I found out just how deep their pettiness ran. It happened on a Monday. I'd gone into town to pick up feed and some PVC elbows from the hardware store. Took me 2 hours round trip. When I came back, my truck, the old Ford F-250 I used for hauling lumber and firewood, was gone. Not moved, gone. I checked the field, the workshop, the side trail. Nothing but fresh tire tracks and a red plastic tag zip-tied to my gate that read, Unauthorized Vehicle Abatement, Silver Creek Hollow HOA. I stood there staring at it like it might vanish if I squinted hard enough. But nope, it stayed, bold and dumb. I called the sheriff's office. They hadn't towed anything. Called the city impound. Nothing in my name. Finally, after some digging, I found it, a small towing company in the next county over. The kind that usually deals with repossessions and shady lot removals. When I asked who authorized it, the guy on the phone said, some lady named Karen from the community board, said the truck was abandoned and part of a blight case. Blight! They were calling my working farm truck, a truck with tags, insurance, and a toolbox full of socket wrenches, blight. I drove out there and got it back, $487 lighter. When I returned home, there was an envelope taped to my door, official looking, from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was an injunction. The HOA was suing me for prolonged visual contamination, vehicular disrepair, and hostile landscaping practices. Hostile landscaping practices. I sat down on the porch with the letter in one hand and a beer in the other, and I laughed so hard Buck ran inside. They'd gone full lunatic. But now it was legal. They wanted to fight in court? Fine. But I wasn't going in unarmed. I called up a buddy of mine from my Army days, Tyson Reeves. Used to run point on engineering patrols in Afghanistan. Now he worked in private security, the kind that contracts with people who say things like, no comment, and you didn't get this from me. I told him what was going on. He laughed for 5 straight minutes, then asked what kind of toys I wanted. Nothing that'll get me on a list, I said. Just enough to make him rethink pulling into my field. 3 days later, Tyson rolled up in a black van with Tennessee plates and a grin wide enough to scare a deer. Inside the van were motion sensors, heat signature lures, old surplus tripwire canisters, and one item wrapped in a crate labeled Property Training Device, Inert Explosive. It was, essentially, a hollow landmine casing retrofitted to make a boom without the bang. But there was also something else. A real pressure, triggered concussive mine, small yield, low radius, loud as hell. You didn't get this from me, Tyson said, but if anyone asks, it's a bird deterrent. We spent the next 2 nights installing a perimeter system just inside the tree line. Pressure plates rigged to flare launchers and smoke canisters, heat lures buried in a grid pattern that mimicked movement across infrared scopes. It was harmless, mostly. Unless someone decided to get cute and dig, but the jewel of it all, the piece de resistance, was the real mine. We buried it just off the eastern edge of the property, 10 feet in from the gravel loop where Karen had, for months, parked her Lexus like she owned the mineral rights. We marked it clearly with fake warning signs, distressed tape, and a bent metal plaque that read, Test Range, Live Training. It looked abandoned, governmental, perfectly illegal, and completely plausible. Then we waited. A week passed, then 2. Nothing. But the HOA was up to something. I could feel it in the air. Yard signs started popping up at the subdivision entrance. Silver Creek Hollow, annual block, wide garage sale, visitors welcome, overflow parking in designated areas. There were maps posted. Arrows drawn, I knew where this was going. One red arrow pointed straight into my pasture, labeled open field parking extra room. I nearly choked on my coffee. They didn't just ignore the mine warnings. They made it official. I waited until the night before the sale to make one final adjustment, just enough to make sure the pressure sensor on the real mine would trip if someone parked a little too close. Not enough to hurt, just enough to launch the lid and flip anything lighter than a Buick. The next morning the sun rose over a battlefield that didn't know it yet. I sat on the porch with Buck and Lucy, watching as car after car poured into the subdivision. Minivans, golf carts, pickup trucks filled with folding tables and old lamps. The HOA board scurried around in matching polos like ants before a flood. Karen stood at the main corner directing cars. Her voice carried across the field. Overflow in the open lot. Follow the markers. I waited. And then it happened. A golf cart, decorated with balloons and loaded with some kid's lemonade stand, peeled off the road and rolled toward my pasture. It bounced once, twice, and came to a full stop just 2 feet inside the perimeter. The mine went off. Not a real explosion, just a perfect concussive blast that launched the back end of the cart 3 feet into the air. The balloons popped in midair. The lemonade stand disintegrated into flying solo cups and citrus shrapnel. A shriek rang out as the driver, a nervous-looking HOA VP named Milton, was flung from the front seat and landed face first in my alfalfa. I've seen quieter scenes at demolition derbies. People screamed. Karen ran toward the smoke. Someone yelled for an ambulance. And me? I just sat there, sipping my coffee, flipping through the county ordinance book like I was checking the weather. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. By then, the HOA members had managed to wrangle Milton onto a stretcher. He wasn't badly hurt, some bruised ribs and a shattered sense of entitlement, but he looked like he'd seen a ghost and smelled like he'd fought one. Karen came storming up to my porch, screaming something about lethal force and domestic terrorism. I handed the sheriff a copy of the 1904 Mineral Rights Clause and pointed to the signs. "It's clearly marked," I said. "Historical Ordnance Protection. Legal since before her subdivision even existed." The sheriff squinted at the paperwork. Then at the blown-apart golf cart. Then back at Karen. "You told people to park on private property?" he asked. "That's what the map said," she snapped. "That's what I authorized." "You authorized overflow parking? Onto a field with landmine warnings?" The sheriff blinked. "Karen, what the hell's wrong with you?" The media showed up an hour later. Local news. Then regional. By sunset, I was on 3 separate broadcasts. Rural man mines driveway to stop HOA trespassers. Golf cart explosion sparks legal firestorm, and my personal favorite. Boom goes the Karen. Within 48 hours, I had a lawyer, a court date, and a line of reporters wanting to know if I'd do it all again. I told them I'd think about it. The lawsuit came quick. The HOA filed for reckless endangerment, public nuisance, and something called intentional provocation by simulated munitions. My attorney, an old bulldog named Harlan McRae, laughed them out of the pre-trial. Agricultural deterrents, he told the judge. Clearly marked, historically protected. Your Honor, my client's only crime is being more creative than the average trespasser. The judge agreed. Case dismissed. Karen's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since the wine night pantsuit incident. They tried a countersuit for defamation, lost again. Turns out trespassing onto private property marked with explosive warnings, even fake ones, is still trespassing. And getting someone hurt in the process? That's on the person who sent them in. Public opinion turned fast. People don't love HOAs. But they really don't love HOAs that send kids and golf carts into literal minefields. Overnight, Silver Creek Hollow went from premier neighborhood to parking lot war zone. But that was only the beginning of their collapse. There's a moment after a legal win, when the adrenaline fades, the courtroom clears, and the weight of what just happened finally lands. It doesn't come with fireworks. There's no confetti cannon or cheering crowd, just a sharp, silent stillness. For me, it happened while I was standing in the hallway of the county courthouse, watching Karen Wilson scream into her phone as her attorney tried to peel her off the wall like an angry barnacle. I'd just won a lawsuit against the entire Silver Creek Hollow HOA. Trespassing, property damage, emotional distress. I even threw in vehicular theft by way of extrajudicial towing, just to twist the knife. The jury didn't deliberate long. Not after seeing the drone footage of their midnight meetings, the fabricated RV park complaint, or the video of Karen literally directing people onto my land before the golf cart went airborne. My lawyer, Harlan, laid it out like a southern preacher giving the closing sermon at a revival. This man, he said, gesturing toward me like I was some endangered species, did not ask for war. He asked for peace, privacy, maybe a little gravel respect. And what did he get? Trespass, harassment. A lemonade stand turned into a landmine crime scene. The gallery laughed. Karen did not. The judge awarded me a settlement large enough to repaint the barn, replace the truck they towed, and take a victory vacation somewhere tropical and morally bankrupt. But I didn't want beaches or drinks with little umbrellas. I wanted permanence. I wanted steel. So that's what I built. It took 2 weeks, 4 welders, and a backhoe I borrowed from a neighbor who still owed me for a roof repair back in 2016. Together, we installed a wrought iron gate at the head of my driveway, 12 feet high, solid as a freight train, with twin doors that swung open like the gates of a medieval castle. Across the arch, in letters forged from reclaimed combine parts and painted in blood-red enamel, read 5 simple words: "Park here and perish." Below that, a smaller brass plaque read, "Private agricultural minefield. No trespassing. Survivors will be prosecuted." I didn't stop there. I paved the gravel inlaid with spikes, not real ones, just enough to suggest pain, and flanked the path with decorative barrels stenciled with radioactive symbols I found on eBay. It looked less like a driveway and more like a Cold War exhibit. People stopped driving through. They also stopped waving. But that suited me just fine. The HOA board tried to appeal the verdict. Tried to paint me as a fringe lunatic with a flair for pageantry. But by then, public opinion had already turned. News stations had a field day with the headlines. Gated farm goes nuclear on HOA. Judge rules landmine warning totally legal. Karen can't catch a break. It didn't help that HOA members started resigning one by one, like rats abandoning a very petty ship. Milton, the one who did a cartwheel into my alfalfa, stepped down for medical reasons. Todd or Kevin, whichever one filed the RV complaint, claimed burnout. And Karen? Well, Karen lasted exactly 6 days after the verdict before she was asked, politely I'm told, to step down for the good of the community. But stepping down wasn't enough. See, when you win big, you don't just get a check and a handshake. You get discovery documents, emails, internal memos. All the behind-the-scenes garbage they thought would stay buried in password-protected drives and Google Docs labeled Book Club Notes. I saw it all. The emails about removing unsightly farm elements, the board meeting notes titled Jackson Must Be Managed, and the HOA subgroup chat titled Boomer Containment Strategy. They called me a boomer. I was born in '78. That alone should have cost them the case. But the true final blow came when the county announced they were suspending the Silver Creek Hollow HOA's operating charter, pending further review of their governance practices. Translation? The HOA was effectively dead. The website went offline, the meetings stopped, the clipboard patrols vanished like a bad dream after cold coffee. One by one, the beige boxes started growing wild again. A lawn went unmowed. A pink flamingo reappeared. Someone painted their mailbox green. Without Karen's iron grip, the whole thing crumbled like a dry cracker in a damp glove box. I heard she moved 3 counties over into a luxury condo with a strict no-pets policy and complimentary yoga. I hope the downward dog helps her sleep. But even after the dust settled, I wasn't quite done. There was one more touch I wanted to add, a little something poetic. I waited until spring, when the subdivision was thawing out from a long HOA-free winter. Then I went down to the end of their cul-de-sac, the one that used to funnel traffic toward my fields, and installed a brand new sign, forest green, double-posted, trimmed in bronze. It looked official, respectable, even tasteful. It read, Community Guest Parking, available in adjacent field, and beneath that in block letters, Caution, Unexploded Ordnance. Park at your own risk. I even added a QR code that linked to a Wikipedia article on WWI anti-tank mines, just for flavor. It was decorative, mostly. The mines were long gone. The wires disconnected. But the fear? That lingered. People saw the sign. They remembered the golf cart. The lemonade. The look on Karen's face when her Lexus did a 3-point turn on the highway shoulder just to avoid my gate, and that was enough. Funny thing about landmines. They don't always explode. But the fear? That lingers forever.